Picture this for a moment. What if a cutting-edge artificial intelligence reads an ancient book that has been wrapped in mystery and controversy for centuries, and then declares it holds a significant clue tied to the year 2026? Should that be dismissed as pure coincidence? Or might there be something deeper worth exploring? That is the question grabbing so many people's attention right now. When Grok 4 was presented with the Book of Enoch in the year 2026, its answer went well beyond a straightforward response. It drew connections between various sections of this ancient text, its chronology and the ideas embedded within it, offering an interpretation that gave many people genuine pause. But before we go any further, one thing needs to be stated clearly. We are not here to argue that any prophecy is real, and we are certainly not here to stir up anxiety. What we are going to do is simply understand what the Book of Enoch actually is, why it carries such a unique reputation, what Grok 4 identified within it, and why the year 2026 keeps appearing in the conversation. We will also examine how solid this artificial intelligence interpretation truly is and where it falls short. Before we get into all of that, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Now, let us start by understanding what the Book of Enoch really is. Over recent years, this book has been making its way back into public conversation. Yet, it is anything but a recent work. Scholars generally believe it was composed roughly 2,000 years ago. It belongs to the tradition of ancient Jewish religious writings and is associated with Enoch, the figure who appears in the book of Genesis. According to Genesis, Enoch was the 7th generation descendant of Adam. What sets him apart is that, unlike other figures, he was not described as having passed away in the conventional sense. Rather, the scripture says he walked alongside God, and then God simply took him. Because of this unusual account, Enoch occupies a distinct and respected place across ancient religious traditions. The particular version that most people refer to today goes by the name First Enoch. The book itself is not a brief work. It is a substantial volume divided into several sections. 5 major parts make up its structure, and each one centers on a distinct subject. Among the topics covered are celestial beings known as the Watchers, who descended to Earth and violated the boundaries established for humankind. It also speaks of the Nephilim, mighty giant figures of tremendous power. Beyond that, the book addresses the order governing the heavens, the measurement of time, and a sacred heavenly calendar. As the narrative unfolds, it traces the path of human civilization before ultimately turning to the subject of final judgment. This is precisely why so many readers regard the Book of Enoch as something far beyond an ordinary religious text. They view it as a remarkable document that weaves together ideas concerning history, belief, and what is yet to come. That said, not every religious tradition embraces everything contained within its pages. So, when approaching this book, it is worth keeping in mind the distinction between historical record and the interpretations that developed over time. Which brings us to an important question. If the Book of Enoch was held in such high regard, why did it fail to find a place in most versions of the Bible? The answer is layered, touching on history, religious tradition, and the choices made by various communities across different eras. A good starting point is the New Testament, and more specifically, the Epistle of Jude. That letter contains a direct quotation drawn from the Book of Enoch. This alone tells us the book was certainly not unfamiliar during the early years of Christianity. Many scholars take this as evidence that it was actively read at the time and that its contents were well known to people then. Further compelling evidence comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among those ancient manuscripts, multiple copies of the Book of Enoch were found. This discovery confirmed that the Essene community, one of the prominent Jewish religious groups of that era, held the book in genuine esteem. Put simply, this was no obscure or buried manuscript. It was circulated, carefully preserved, and genuinely treasured by the people of its own time. And when the time came for religious authorities to finalize the official list of sacred texts, what scholars call the canon, many writings were carefully examined and debated. Through that process, the Book of Enoch was ultimately set aside and not included in the canon recognized by most Christian traditions. But here is something worth understanding clearly. It was not left out, because it was formally declared a forgery or completely unreliable. Historians point to several contributing factors, among them long-standing religious customs, varying theological perspectives, and the deeply complicated nature of how the biblical canon was shaped over time. Still, the story did not stop there. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church never let go of this book. To this day, this Book of Enoch holds the status of official scripture within that tradition and remains a recognized part of its Bible. That is one of the most significant reasons the book managed to survive and is still accessible to readers all across the world. So, on one hand, you have traditions that chose to keep it outside the canon, while on the other, there's a church that guarded it carefully across many centuries. Perhaps that tension is exactly what keeps the Book of Enoch drawing so much curiosity and attention even now. So, what did Grok actually say? Let us get into the question that set all of this in motion. Someone put a straightforward question to Grok. What does the Book of Enoch say about the year 2026? Under normal circumstances, an AI might respond with a brief overview of the text or walk through its historical background. But this particular response turned out to be something a bit different. Rather than offering a handful of surface-level lines, Grok examined the book's overall structure, worked through its internal timeline, and drew connections across different sections to arrive at a detailed and layered interpretation. That is precisely what made its answers stand out and gain so much notice. Grok approached the Book of Enoch as a single unified whole. It did not anchor itself to one isolated chapter or lean on a single prophecy. Instead, it brought together different portions of the text and looked at the broader picture that emerged when those pieces were considered together. Many researchers refer to this kind of approach as structural reading. Through this method, the entire text is treated as one interconnected work rather than a loose collection of separate narratives. From there, the AI cross-referenced the timeline described within the book against actual historical events and various periods across human history. This can be thought of as a historical timeline approach. According to Grok, when the full framework is examined as a whole, the book stops looking like a simple record of ancient happenings. Instead, it begins to resemble something closer to a blueprint theory, a structured framework attempting to explain the different stages of human civilization. One of the most striking observations was that the early sections of the Book of Enoch suggest the visions revealed to Enoch were never intended solely for the people of his own era. The text indicates these messages were carefully preserved for a generation, living far into the future. Grok placed more weight on this particular point than on anything else within its analysis. It naturally raised the question of whether that distant future generation might actually be the one alive right now. This is precisely where the year 2026 enters the conversation. Grok did not assert that the book directly names the year 2026. Rather, it explained that when various timelines, numerical patterns, and historical sequences found throughout the book are brought together, certain interpretations appear to gesture toward the present moment. Based on its analysis, 2026 is not presented as a fixed prophecy, but rather as one possible point of interpretation. Following this response, widespread discussion began to unfold. Some researchers found it a genuinely thought-provoking study, while others argued it was simply an AI-generated reading and should not be regarded as established historical fact or solid evidence. Essentially, the debate was never really about whether the book itself exists, but about how much trust can reasonably be placed in any particular interpretation of it. Now we arrive at what Grok itself described as the strongest foundation underlying its entire analysis. This is the theory of 70 generations, and it appears in chapter 10 of the first book of Enoch. The Watchers, those heavenly beings who violated divine law, were not dealt with right away. Rather, they were held in confinement for 70 generations awaiting the final reckoning. That particular number would go on to become one of the most debated elements within the entire text. So the natural question arises, just how long is a span of 70 generations? And this is precisely where the disagreements start. Ancient writings never lay out a clear fixed length for a single generation. Certain people place one generation at roughly 20 years, others put it closer to 30, and some stretch it even further than that. Because no standard definition exists, calculating 70 generations using different methods can produce wildly different outcomes. That is exactly why many scholars turn their attention to biblical genealogies. They work to trace the lineage recorded after Enoch and piece together various historical timelines. Even so, no single consistent answer emerges from those efforts. Some of those models land around the current period, while others arrive at dates a little earlier or somewhat later. This ongoing disagreement is a big part of why no unified consensus has ever been reached on the matter. Grok examined these various scholarly frameworks before arriving at its own position. Based on certain interpretive models, it concluded that the 70-generation window appears to close somewhere in the vicinity of the present era. However, one crucial point deserves to be clearly understood. The AI made no claim that this represented a scientifically established truth. It simply noted that particular historical and interpretive frameworks point in that general direction. There's another significant detail, drawn directly from the Book of Enoch, worth highlighting here. The end of the 70 generations is never portrayed as something that happens in a single moment. Instead, it is framed as a transitional period of judgment, a gradual shift in the existing order. Put differently, it describes a stretch of time during which the old structure slowly begins to unravel and a process of reckoning gets underway. No specific date is attached to it, and it carries no sense of sudden finality. That is a large part of why many people resist treating the year 2026 as a definitive prophetic marker, even if this theory is accepted. Many argue it may simply mark the opening of a period during which gradual shifts begin to show themselves. At the same time, numerous historians and religious scholars maintain that this is purely an interpretation, not a verified prophecy. Mapping the timelines of ancient writings onto the modern calendar with any real precision is simply not something that can be done easily. So, the most important takeaway from this whole conversation is that the 70 generations theory is essentially an interpretive lens. It should never be taken as an absolute certainty or a locked-in prediction. Different scholars read it in different ways, and that is precisely why the discussion has never really settled even now. Now it is time to turn to the Watchers, because this section is widely regarded as the most talked about portion of the Book of Enoch. According to the text, a group of 200 Watchers, described as heavenly beings, made their way down to Earth. The place they reportedly chose for their descent was Mount Hermon. Once there, they bound themselves together with a shared oath, ensuring that none among them could withdraw from the decision they had made. After that, they began making their presence felt in the human world. The book tells us that these Watchers entered into unions with human women, and from those relationships came beings known as the Nephilim. These figures are portrayed as enormous, immensely powerful, and deeply destructive. The text goes on to say that as time passed, they brought growing chaos and turmoil upon the earth. But the account does not stop there. According to the Book of Enoch, the Watchers also passed along knowledge to humanity that was considered wholly unsuitable for people at that point in time. This included the crafting of weapons, the practice of astrology, sorcery, and various other forms of understanding that are commonly referred to today as forbidden knowledge. The book suggests that once this knowledge began to be turned toward harmful ends, corruption and disorder spread steadily across the world. This mounting state of decay is then presented as one of the central reasons behind the coming of the Great Flood. The Nephilim, as the texts describe, were wiped out by the flood, yet their spirits lingered on. The Watchers, on the other hand, faced imprisonment as a consequence of their actions, and according to the writings, they remained confined there, until the day of final judgment. In the present day, people interpret these ideas in quite different ways. Certain individuals believe these accounts describe genuine historical events, while many scholars and researchers tend to view them as symbolic narratives. From their perspective, the Watchers may represent forces that handed humanity powerful knowledge and capabilities long before people were truly equipped to handle them wisely. That is precisely why, in the modern era, this whole story is frequently understood as a symbolic reading rather than an established historical truth. So the question becomes, how exactly did Grok connect the ancient story of the Watchers to the world we live in today? One thing needs to be stated clearly right from the start. The AI never claimed that the Book of Enoch speaks directly about modern technology or current events. What it suggested was that certain patterns found within the book seem to echo situations we encounter in today's world. Put differently, this is purely a matter of interpretation, not something presented as verified fact. The first parallel drawn was with artificial intelligence. AI is moving forward at a remarkable pace right now. Fresh capabilities emerge every few months. Yet a great number of experts point out that the rate of AI development is advancing far more rapidly than the ethical frameworks and safety guidelines meant to accompany it. Grok drew a comparison between this reality and the ancient idea of the Watchers passing along knowledge to humans before they were genuinely ready to carry that responsibility. The following example brought up was genetic editing. Technologies capable of altering the genes of living beings exist today. In many respects, they carry enormous promise for medicine and human well-being, but they also continue to stir significant ethical discussion. According to Grok, this represents yet another reflection of the same underlying idea that profound and transformative knowledge tends to arrive first, while the rules governing its responsible use tend to take shape considerably later. In much the same way, today's information networks have brought the entire world closer together. Social media, massive digital platforms, and their underlying algorithms can push content out to millions of people in a matter of minutes. Yet those same tools can just as easily be used to spread false information or quietly shape what the public believes. Grok described this as one of the defining forms of manipulation in the modern age. It also highlighted that when enormous power and sophisticated technology end up concentrated among a small group of individuals or large institutions, the question of who is held accountable becomes far more pressing. Grok tied this idea directly to powerful elites, major institutions, and the weight of human choices. Put simply, the real issue is not the technology on its own, but the responsibility carried by those who wield it. The Book of Enoch also makes clear that the Great Flood did not arrive without warning. Long before it came, corruption, disorder, and moral decay had been steadily building over time. Grok suggested that this pattern carries a striking resemblance to the world we live in today. That said, it does not mean the same. events are necessarily set to repeat themselves. It is simply a symbolic parallel that some people find meaningful while many others do not. So the whole of Grok's analysis is really an effort to draw connections between the present world and an ancient text, rather than to offer a firm prediction about what lies ahead. That is precisely why it should always be treated as one interpretation, not as an established truth. Now there is another portion of the Book of Enoch that draws far less attention, even though many scholars regard it as one of the most distinctive sections in the entire work. It is known as the astronomical book, spanning chapters 72 through 82. Here, the narrative steps away from the main story and turns instead toward time, the changing seasons, and the structured order of the heavens. This section lays out a calendar of 364 days. The full year is broken into 4 equal seasons, each containing 13 weeks. In other words, the entire system operates on a fixed and perfectly balanced arrangement. The book presents this as the correct and proper method for measuring time. It also conveys that all of creation functions according to a defined structure and that humanity ought to live in alignment with that structure. Notably, a remarkably similar calendar has also been linked to the Essenes, an ancient community within Judaism. A comparable system of tracking time appears as well in the Book of Jubilees. For these reasons, many scholars are of the view that certain religious communities of that era regarded this calendar as particularly significant. Grok likewise incorporated this calendar into its examination. It sought to place this old timekeeping system side by side with the calendar used today. The central difficulty, however, is that the modern world operates under the Gregorian calendar, while the system described in the Book of Enoch is quite different. Because of this gap, aligning the two with full precision is no simple task. Certain contemporary readings also draw connections between shifting weather conditions, environmental disruption, and changes in nature with the symbolic language found throughout this section. Even so, it is worth keeping in mind that these remain personal interpretations offered by various individuals. No evidence exists suggesting that the book directly foretells today's climate situation or the happenings of any particular year. Put simply, the astronomical book makes clear that the Book of Enoch is far more than a collection of mysterious tales. It also offers a distinct framework for understanding time, the natural world, and the concept of order. That said, modern readings of this section carry their own set of limitations. They should therefore never be accepted as absolute or unquestionable truth. Now, turning our attention to the Apocalypse of Weeks, which is widely regarded as the most structured historical outline found within the Book of Enoch. In this portion, the whole of human history is broken down into 10 weeks, or 10 broad periods of time. Here, the term week carries no reference to 7 days. Rather, it stands for vast and sweeping eras across the span of history. Every week, within this framework, represents a distinct era and illustrates how humanity progresses through time. The structure opens with the age of Enoch and then traces the path of human civilization step by step. Each week carries its own character and role. As the narrative advances, the contrast between righteousness and corruption grows increasingly visible. That is precisely why so many people regard it as a symbolic lens through which history can be understood. The 8th and 9th weeks draw the greatest amount of attention. The text describes the 8th week as a period when fractures begin to show within a broken and corrupted system. Things that have been concealed for a very long time gradually start surfacing into plain sight. People begin to challenge the flaws embedded within governments, institutions, and society as a whole. This does not point to any single moment, but rather to a slow and steady process of transformation. Following that comes the description of the 9th week. It is presented as the opening stage of a process involving judgment. Yet again, it is not portrayed as something that unfolds on one particular day. Rather, it is depicted as an extended period of change, during which the line between good and evil becomes ever more defined. For this reason, many scholars suggest that judgment here may refer not only to consequences, but also to a broader shift in the established order of things. In its examination, Grok attempted to connect this framework to the contemporary world. It put forward the idea that if this entire timeline is treated as an interpretive model, certain people believe the current era sits somewhere between the 8th and 9th weeks. Drawing from this notion, the year 2026 is described as part of a transitional phase, a moment of ongoing change. But it remains essential to acknowledge that this is not a firm prophecy, and no scientific basis exists to back it up. It is simply one interpretation offered by certain individuals, and by no means do all scholars accept it. In short, the Apocalypse of Weeks does not aim to pinpoint one specific date. Rather than offering a straightforward historical account, this section presents a religious and symbolic framework for understanding history across different eras. Even now, various people approach it through entirely different lenses. Now we arrive at the part Grok connected most strongly to the present day, the concept of forbidden knowledge, wisdom that found its way to humanity before people were truly ready to handle it with care. This idea runs through the story of the Watchers, as described in the Book of Enoch. According to that text, they passed on many powerful forms of knowledge to human beings, but the irresponsible use of that knowledge eventually became one of the central reasons for the troubles that followed in the world. According to Grok, a very similar pattern can be recognized in certain technologies of our own time. Take artificial intelligence as a starting point. How rapidly AI has moved forward over recent years is something nobody can deny. At this point, AI systems can produce written content, generate imagery, create video, and carry out countless tasks that once belonged exclusively to human beings. But alongside all of that progress, a serious question hangs in the air. Is our moral understanding and our framework of rules keeping pace with the technology itself? That same concern extends into the field of genetic engineering as well. Scientists today are actively developing tools capable of altering genetic material. Such breakthroughs could open the door to treating many severe conditions. Yet worries about how these tools might be misused are growing just as fast. Put simply, technology carries no inherent moral value on its own. What truly matters is who holds it and what they choose to do with it. Grok also drew attention to the fact that today, large institutions and powerful digital systems shape society to a degree never seen before. Algorithms running social media platforms and major online networks have the ability to influence how people think, what information reaches them, and even the choices they end up making. So the deeper question isn't just about the technology itself. It's about the responsibility carried by those individuals and organizations who hold the controls. When technology is wielded with openness and a sense of responsibility, it holds genuine potential to serve the greater good. But when it exists purely as a means of expanding authority or tightening control, the outcomes can look very different indeed. One of the most thought-provoking aspects of this whole examination is the deep irony woven through it. The Book of Enoch has long been regarded as a warning against the reckless handling of profound and dangerous knowledge. And yet here we are today, with that very same text being studied and interpreted by a modern artificial intelligence. Grok itself acknowledged that this particular situation deserves some serious reflection. Simply put, AI is an extraordinarily capable instrument, but what it ultimately produces will depend on the values and intentions of those directing it. That is precisely why the central takeaway from this entire conversation is less about machines and far more about the choices human beings make. Every breakthrough in understanding brings along with it fresh possibilities and fresh complications. When all is said and done, it is always people who determine how that newfound power gets applied. Now the natural question becomes this: if the Book of Enoch points toward a specific era, what would allow someone to recognize it? In response to that, the book lays out several indicators that many connect to the signs and threshold framework. Even so, it must be said again that this remains a matter of religious interpretation, not a scientifically grounded forecast. The first indicator is the rise of harm and conflict, a slow creeping normalization of destructive behavior within communities. And the book suggests that when such conduct gradually becomes unremarkable and people stop reacting to it, that itself ought to raise concern. Alongside that, it addresses the matter of deception, the spreading of untruth, and dishonesty. When distinguishing reality from fabrication grows increasingly difficult and false information travels rapidly, that too is presented as a meaningful signal. Following this, the book turns its attention to the effect on young people and the generations coming of age. It suggests that if, from an early point in life, certain ideas or outside pressures begin taking root that erode a clear sense of right and wrong, that shift can itself be understood as a reflection of a society undergoing deep change. When too much power becomes concentrated in the hands of just a few individuals or institutions, that situation also falls within this same framework. Once major decisions get restricted to only a small circle of people, the question of who answers for those decisions grows even more pressing. The book also addresses a widening imbalance in the natural world. Nowadays, some people link this to environmental shifts and instability in nature, though that remains their own reading of the text, since the original writing never directly points to events happening today. This is precisely where the threshold theory enters the picture. The core idea is that many of society's problems build up gradually over long stretches of time, but eventually they hit a ceiling, a threshold, and from that moment forward, nothing stays as it was, and a period of deep change sets in. Certain modern readers also connect this concept to today's tightly woven global reality, where information, money, and decisions can ripple across the entire world in a matter of moments. But the single most important thing to understand is that this whole framework is an interpretive model. It should never be treated as confirmed prophecy. Researchers approach it from many different angles and reach different conclusions. So no firm claim can honestly be made about 2026 or any other particular moment in time. Up to this point, we have been walking through the warning portions of the Book of Enoch. But if you sit down and read the whole book carefully, something becomes unmistakably clear. It is not purely about darkness and judgment. There is also a strong current of hope running through it. That hope finds its expression in the remnant, a group of people who keep walking the right path even when the times around them grow difficult. The book also calls these individuals the righteous and the chosen. Yet the idea of the chosen here carries no connection to any specific nation, ethnic background, or institution. The emphasis falls entirely on how a person decides to live their life. Those who hold firmly to truth, integrity, and what is genuinely right are regarded as belonging to this group. When wrongdoing starts spreading through society, according to the Book of Enoch, the greatest trial becomes the path that every individual decides to walk. If a person refuses to join corruption, dishonesty, and harmful behavior, they are considered to be standing alongside the moral order that the book references time and time again. The true struggle is not about transforming those around you, but about staying honest and faithful to yourself. Within this same context, the book also speaks of a kind of supernatural authority. Certain readers interpret it as a literal supernatural force, while many scholars view it as something more symbolic. In their view, it may simply suggest that when a corrupt system starts to crumble, the voices of those who stand for truth and fairness gradually grow louder. Put differently, change can arrive not only through force, but through clear thinking and thoughtful choices as well. Grok drew a similar conclusion in its own analysis. It pointed out that the future direction of any technology ultimately rests in human hands. Regardless of how sophisticated artificial intelligence becomes, it does not arrive at decisions independently. Human guidelines, intentions, and a sense of responsibility are always working behind it. So the real question is not about artificial intelligence itself, but about the people who choose to put it to use. That is precisely why the final message carried by the Book of Enoch is not rooted in fear, but in responsibility and a sense of hope. It serves as a reminder that no matter how challenging circumstances become, people always hold the ability to choose the right direction. Perhaps that is part of the reason this ancient book continues to make people pause and reflect even today. Now, let us take a moment to bring the entire story together in straightforward terms. We have seen that the Book of Enoch is an ancient religious text that carries ideas such as the 70 generations, the Watchers, the heavenly calendar, the apocalypse of weeks, and the remnant. By weaving these different elements together, Grok set out to explore whether they might carry any meaningful connection to the world we live in now. In this analysis, the year 2026 emerged as a period that certain individuals interpret as a moment of transition and shifting times. But the most crucial thing to grasp here is the distinction between evidence and interpretation. The Book of Enoch is a genuine ancient text. It appears among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church continues to recognize it as part of its official scripture. Those are historical facts. However, linking the ideas found within this book to the modern world, and particularly to the year 2026, is a matter of interpretation. Historians, religious scholars, and researchers do not universally agree on this connection. In a similar way, Grok's analysis does not represent the final word on the matter. Artificial intelligence can process enormous volumes of information and detect patterns, but it cannot determine the ultimate meaning of a religious text. It carries its own limitations, and its conclusions depend heavily on how it processes the information available to it. That is precisely why this entire conversation deserves to be approached with an open and thoughtful mind. It would be wrong to accept it all without reflection, and equally wrong to dismiss it entirely without genuinely trying to understand it. If this subject interests you, the wisest approach is to read the Book of Enoch for yourself. Explore what various scholars have to say and then arrive at your own conclusion. The Book of Enoch is not a scientific prophecy. Grok's response is likewise an interpretation, not an absolute truth. But one thing remains clear. It has brought a 2,000-year-old text back into the heart of modern conversation. The choice ultimately rests with you. Is this simply a coincidence, or is it a perspective genuinely worth reflecting on? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and if you found value in this video, be sure to like and share it as well.